We're going to show more graph features in this movie. And we're going to make a graph. Click on graph upper left. And let's do a time graph just to show you some time alignment features. Here's torque and horsepower versus time. Let's throw RPM in there too. Yeah, it's too busy. Let's turn some of this stuff off. Let's turn these two off and just graph RPM and air fuel down here. And you can see this is versus time. We're graphing all data. And what we can do here is we'll click on these time align buttons over here. And you click on one of them and something is highlighted over here. If you click on one of the labels here, whatever's highlighted here in pink is the graph that you are going to be moving. So let's say we want to take this one with the pink engine RPM line shown here, and let's say we want to move this to the left. You'll do it with this button that shows the arrow to the left, and if you want this to happen faster, you hold down the shift key, and you can see it's happening even faster. Now depending on which one you wanted to time align with, you might want to fine tune it here. But this is what time align lets you do. It lets you move things back and forth with respect to the other tests. Now I'm going to turn off time alignment here. I'm going to show original timing here with this one. And now we're back to the original timing at these different, how it was originally. And there's no time difference between these tests. Another thing you might want to do is you might want to zoom in. There's different ways to zoom in. You can zoom in like this by expanding that way, horizontally or vertically. And then you can move the graph left, right, up, down. You can go back to full view, which is the original auto scaling, where the program picks the best scales to best fill the graph with the best detail. Or another thing you can do is you can take your mouse and put your mouse to the upper left of a section and drag it while holding the mouse button down, and you can zoom in on a particular area. Go back to full view. Now one thing you want to be careful of, if I want to zoom in on this area here, if I click to start graphing close to a line, I'm going to put the cursor on there instead. So when you click, you want to stay away from a line so you don't put a cursor on there instead. Cursor is the line that shows you the readings over here. So that's something to be aware of. Turn the cursor off by clicking on this button. You can also, I think, turn the cursor off, turn cursors on and off with that button. Turn cursor off. Now you also have the option of putting, and I'm going to go back to a typical, well, I'll just click on here, typical power curve comparison. We got our 3 power curves here. And we have another option of this button here putting 2 cursors on the screen. A left cursor and a right cursor. And if I click on a line, I move the left cursor. If I click on a line while holding down the control key, I move the right cursor. And what you can do is you've now bracketed a certain section of the graphs. And here it shows you the left is at 3150 RPM and the right is at 5000 RPM. Let's say we want to change that a little bit, and I use my mouse cursor button here, and I want to go from 3300 to 5000. And I want to see in between these 2 cursors what is the maximum. Click on this button for max. I'm sorry, this is average. And you can see the average here. It shows you what the average torque and horsepower is between this 1700 RPM range. I can click on what's the maximum by clicking on this one. You can see it says max here. Or what is the minimum? Another thing you can do, I'm going to click on this button here to turn the cursors off, is just like with reports, you can save a certain set of specs, certain set of scales, for example, for recall in the future. For example, I'm going to close this. Let's say there's certain scales that we want to always use when we compare certain power curves. Let's say we want to go from the max RPM, let's say we want it to be 6,000. The minimum RPM, we want to be 3,000. And the maximum Y data, somewhat similar to this, let's say we want it to be, let's go 55, 550. And the minimum we want to be 300. Say, make a graph like that. So here we have a graph with a certain set of scales, and you can see here, let's make this 5,500 instead. 6,000 is a little too high. And here we have a certain set of scales. Now I can save this set of scales, and I'm going to save them from under name, under that name. Oops, doesn't like the idea that I have a dash in there. Well, okay. But you get the idea. And then I can open a set of these scales here for use in the future. Or if I can click on one, I could delete it or modify it. And here we have the settings saved. So you can just click on here, and it loads these settings in, these saved settings. You could also click on this format, and we can keep, let's see, you can type in a name for a graph format. You can say, I want to keep the scales I've got, and that also means I got to turn auto scaling off, and I'm going to keep these scales, and you can save it to that name. It already exists. Yep, I want to overwrite it. I'm going to close it. So now what happens, let's say you go back and you make some kind of time graph. Let's put that in there. Something totally different. We go full view. You can go over here on format, save, and just click on this, a saved format, and it could have save the scales here. Click on OK, and you're back to a very standard type of graph format. The right scales 300 to 550. On this scale, 3,000 to 5,500 RPM on this scale. Very handy for saving standard formats. Another thing that you can do is, if you click on File, you see this email option here. What you got to do to get this to work is you got to check that you got some reasonable emailing options set up in preferences. And my email program is Outlook Express. We've had the most experience with this, and that's what happens to be on this computer. So make sure that's set. If you say use other specs below, you got to fill in these specs, and that's a little more complicated but more versatile if you're not using one of these standard email programs. And you do go make a graph, click on File, email a 256 color graph. If you do a 16 color graph, you got to tell the preferences where your MS Paint program is. And it's not hard. Every computer has got MS Paint. But I'm going to do this one because it's easier, more universal. I'm going to say stop. Don't do that. Just to save some time, I'm going to hide that. And then you can type in an email address to somebody. Maybe that's the email address. And as you type these in and you send an email, these emails are saved, so they'll be appearing in this list in the future. And we always provide our default tech@performancetrends.com if you want to send us an email, which I'm going to select here. And you can type in the body of the message something. And then click on send. You want to send it. And here you can see it's being sent. Being sent. And when it's done, it should say everything's okay. There we go. Other things here, with the graph, different grid styles. You can select different background colors. The legend over here. This is how we originally did it. That's why I call classic, or these larger labels. If you select a lot of things to graph, then you go, let's do it. Graph type. I'm going to select a lot of things here. And you can see we're off the bottom. You can slide this stuff up and down, though, by looking at these buttons here. Format, line styles, thicker line styles, data graph, which tests the graph. That brings up the screens you've already seen before. You can turn these off or on. Data multipliers. This is kind of interesting. The program, you can see, is multiplying certain numbers here by 10, so they show up decent on this screen. I'm going to grid style, get this turned off. If you don't want data multipliers, which I would suggest in almost all cases you do, this is what happens. Certain things are going to be shown up fairly high, like torque and horsepower, but these smaller numbers that have small readings like air fuel being like 10 or 11, it's way down here in the mud, you could say, and you can't really see it. Turning on the data multipliers or letting the program pick them lets things show up a lot better. And they're up here. And obviously you can click on the graph or the cursor and display everything. You can also view different things, zooming, specifying scales and stuff. Correction factors, if you just want to see what are the correction factors here, what it was corrected to, and what the actual correction factor was. This would let you see if one of these tests is really different than the other, if the correction factors are really different. View the test comments. So if there's any comments there, you can see them. So you can see there are a lot of powerful options and features in the graphing package in the DataMite program.